The sun was dying again over Cedar Ridge, bleeding crimson across the jagged mountains that guarded the western horizon. Sarah Whitmore stood at her window, watching the familiar spectacle with eyes that had long since stopped seeing beauty in it. The glass pane was cool against her fingertips, a barrier between her and the world that had grown colder since Thomas died 14 months ago. The wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing across the barren stretch between her weathered cabin and the town proper. Cedar Ridge squatted a half-mile east, its ramshackle buildings huddled together like gossiping old women. Sarah could see the church steeple from here, the saloon's false front, and the general store where she traded eggs for flour when the hens were laying. Beyond that, nothing but prairie grass and sagebrush stretched to the ends of the earth. She turned from the window and surveyed her small domain. The cabin consisted of 2 rooms, this main area that served as kitchen, sitting room, and workspace, and the bedroom where she'd slept alone for over a year. Thomas had built it with his own hands, cutting each log, fitting each joint with the precision of a man who believed in permanence. He'd been wrong about that, as he'd been wrong about so many things. The memory of his death still carried the weight of injustice, a dispute over water rights with Harlan Cross, the biggest rancher in the county. Thomas had legal claim to the stream that ran through their property, had the papers to prove it. But papers meant nothing when faced with hired guns and a sheriff who looked the other way. They'd found Thomas face down in that very stream, a bullet in his back, his blood mixing with the water he'd died defending. The town had whispered. Of course, they always whispered. Some said Thomas had been foolish to stand against Cross. Others, in hushed tones behind closed doors, suggested he'd been stealing water, that he'd gotten what he deserved. The lies spread like wildfire through dry grass, leaving Sarah's reputation singed at the edges. The young widow Whitmore, they called her, with that particular tone that suggested tragedy was somehow contagious. Sarah shook off the memories and focused on the evening's tasks. The chickens needed securing for the night, the fire needed stoking, and she had mending to finish by lamplight. She'd learned to fill her hours with work, to exhaust her body so thoroughly that sleep came without dreams. As she stepped outside to tend the chickens, the air had changed. The usual dry heat had given way to something heavier, charged with potential. To the north, clouds were building, great dark towers that flickered with internal light. Sarah had lived in this country long enough to read the signs. A storm was coming, and, by the looks of it, a bad one. She worked quickly, driving the reluctant hens into their coop, checking the latch twice. The horses in the lean-to stable shifted nervously, sensing the atmospheric change. She soothed them with gentle words and made sure they had fresh water. By the time she finished, the wind had picked up considerably, tugging at her skirts and loosening strands of dark hair from her simple bun. The first rumble of thunder rolled across the prairie as she hurried back inside. Sarah lit the oil lamp, its warm glow pushing back the gathering darkness. She had just settled into her chair with her mending basket when she heard it, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching. Her hands stilled on the fabric. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour, especially with a storm brewing. Sarah set aside her work and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the faded curtains. A lone rider was coming up the path, hunched against the wind, his hat pulled low. Horse and man looked like they'd been traveling hard. She could see the lather on the animal's flanks, even in the failing light. The rider stopped at her gate, seeming to debate. Sarah watched him dismount, noted the way he favored his left side, the stiffness in his movements that spoke of exhaustion or injury, or both. He led his horse to the porch post and climbed the steps. His knock, when it came, was firm but not demanding. Sarah hesitated. A woman alone had to be careful, had to weigh charity against caution. But the rain was starting now, fat drops that splattered in the dust, and something in the stranger's weary posture tugged at her conscience. She opened the door a crack, keeping one hand on the shotgun she stored beside the frame. "Ma'am?" The stranger touched his hat brim. I apologize for the intrusion. I'm looking for shelter from the storm. I can sleep in your barn if you've got one. Pay you for the trouble." The lamplight from inside caught his face. Weathered features. Several days' worth of stubble. Eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin. Sarah noticed the way his coat hung, suggesting the weight of a concealed weapon, the watchful stillness of a man accustomed to danger. "There's no barn," she heard herself say. "Just a lean-to, and the horses don't take kindly to strangers." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark relief. Thunder followed almost immediately. The rain intensified, driving sideways now. The stranger didn't plead or push. He simply stood there, water beginning to stream from his hat, waiting for her decision. There was something in that patience, that acceptance of whatever judgment she might render, that made up her mind. "You can come in," Sarah said, stepping back, "until the storm passes." He moved past her carefully, maintaining distance, respectful of the boundaries between them. Up close, she could smell trail dust, leather, and something else, the metallic scent of old blood. His coat was indeed weighted on the right side, and she glimpsed the worn handle of a Colt revolver. "I'm grateful, ma'am." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with premature gray. "Name's Luke Garrison. Sarah Whitmore." She didn't offer her hand, and he didn't expect it. "You can hang your coat by the door. I'll heat some stew." As he shrugged out of the wet garment, she noticed the careful way he moved, protecting his ribs. Definitely injured. Then, she also noted the quality of his guns, well-maintained, expensive, not the weapons of a common drifter. Sarah busied herself at the stove, aware of him settling carefully into the chair by the fire. The storm had arrived in earnest now. Rain hammering the roof, wind howling around the corners of the cabin. The small space suddenly felt smaller with his presence, the shadows deeper, the lamplight more intimate than she'd intended. "Been riding long?" she asked, filling the silence as she stirred the pot. 3 days, maybe 4. His voice was hoarse with dust and fatigue. "Lost track somewhere around the Sangre de Cristo range. That's hard country." She ladled stew into 2 bowls, added chunks of day-old bread. "Especially alone. Sometimes alone is safer." She set the food before him, noticed how he waited until she'd seated herself before eating. His manners spoke of better origins than his current circumstances suggested. They ate in companionable silence, the storm providing all the conversation needed. When he'd finished, Luke Garrison leaned back carefully, a ghost of pain crossing his features. "I should see to my horse." "In this weather?" Sarah shook her head. "He'll survive. You might not." As if to emphasize her point, something crashed outside, a tree branch, perhaps, or loose lumber from the wood pile. The cabin shuddered, and the lamplight flickered. "This place going to hold?" Luke asked, eyeing the walls. "It's held through worse." But even as she said it, Sarah felt uncertain. The storms had been fiercer lately, more violent, as if the land itself was angry. Another crash, closer this time. Luke was on his feet despite his injuries, moving to the window. "Your shutters are loose. They'll tear off if we don't secure them." He was right. Sarah grabbed her shawl, and together they ventured into the tempest. The wind nearly knocked her down the moment she stepped outside. Rain stung like needles, soaking through her dress in seconds. Luke caught her arm, steadying her, and they fought their way to the window. Working together, they wrestled the shutters closed, Luke producing rope from his saddlebags to tie them secure. They repeated the process with the other windows, Sarah holding the shutters while he worked the knots with practiced efficiency. By the time they stumbled back inside, both were drenched to the skin, breathless from fighting the wind. Sarah's hands shook as she rebuilt the fire. Luke had retreated to the far corner, respecting propriety despite their shared trial. She disappeared into the bedroom, emerging in dry clothes with a bundle of Thomas's things. "These should fit," she said, not meeting his eyes. They were my husband's." Luke took them with a quiet "thank you" and stepped outside to the covered porch to change. Sarah busied herself making coffee, trying not to think about the strangeness of seeing another man in Thomas's clothes when he returned. They sat by the fire again, steam rising from their damp hair, the storm raging beyond the walls. The enforced intimacy of the situation, the darkness, the isolation, the shared danger, created a peculiar bubble outside normal social constraints. "Your husband," Luke said eventually. "He's been gone a while. 14 months. Sarah stared into the flames. "He was murdered, shot in the back over water rights." Luke's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "I'm sorry. This country can be cruel to good men. Were you a good man?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. A bitter smile touched his lips. "No, ma'am, I was not. Maybe that's why I'm still breathing." The honesty of it surprised her. Men usually lied, painted themselves as heroes or victims. Luke Garrison did neither. "And now?" she asked. "Now I'm just trying to get somewhere else before my past catches up." Sarah understood that feeling, the weight of history, the desire to outrun what couldn't be changed. They lapsed into silence again. But it was different now, charged with unspoken understanding. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it grew stronger, the wind screaming like something alive and furious. The cabin creaked and groaned but held firm, a small island of warmth and light in the chaos. As the night deepened, their conversation meandered through safer topics, the challenges of frontier life, the changing weather patterns, the rumors of railroad expansion. Luke had an educated way of speaking that confirmed her suspicions about his background. Sarah found herself relaxing, her usual guard slowly lowering. When she yawned for the third time, Luke stirred. "You should rest. Mrs. Whitmore, I'll keep watch." "Watch for what?" "Storms can bring out all kinds of trouble." The way he said it suggested he meant more than just the weather. Sarah realized then that his arrival might not have been entirely chance, that perhaps he too was running from something that traveled in darkness. But exhaustion won over caution. She rose, pausing at the bedroom door. "There are blankets in the chest. The floor's hard, but I've slept in worse places. Thank you, ma'am, for everything." Sarah nodded and retreated to her room, leaving the door slightly ajar. She lay in the dark, listening to the storm and the occasional creak of floorboards as Luke moved about. For the first time in 14 months, she didn't feel entirely alone in the world. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the small cabin, an unexpected peace had settled, fragile as spun glass, temporary as morning dew, but real nonetheless. In a few hours, dawn would come, decisions would need to be made, and the careful distance between them would need to be reestablished. But for now, in this suspended moment between darkness and light, between storm and calm, Sarah Whitmore allowed herself to feel something she'd thought lost forever, the simple comfort of another human presence, the possibility that isolation need not be permanent, that even in this harsh land, unexpected grace could arrive on horseback, seeking shelter from the storm. Sarah woke to the sound of splitting wood. For a moment, disoriented, she thought it was Thomas, up early as always to tackle the day's chores. Then memory crashed back. The storm, the stranger, the night that had passed with another soul under her roof. She dressed quickly and stepped into the main room. Luke's blankets were folded neatly on the chest, his coat hanging dry by the door. Through the window, she could see him by the wood pile, shirt sleeves rolled up despite the morning chill, splitting logs with practiced efficiency. He'd already stacked a considerable pile. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Puddles reflected the early sky, and the air carried that peculiar freshness that follows violence, as if nature was trying to apologize for its tantrum. Sarah started breakfast, trying not to watch the easy rhythm of his movements, the way his shoulders worked beneath the cotton shirt, Thomas's shirt. When he came in, carrying an armload of wood. She had coffee ready. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "Man takes shelter. He pays for it somehow." Luke stacked the wood by the fireplace. Your pile was getting low. They ate in the same companionable quiet as the night before, but morning light brought with it the weight of propriety. What had seemed natural in the storm's embrace now felt charged with implications. "I should be moving on," Luke said finally, though something in his tone suggested reluctance. Sarah nodded, ignoring the unexpected pang his words caused. "Your horse will need rest. That was a hard storm." "I've pushed him harder." She studied his face in the morning light, noting lines that spoke of difficult years, the wariness that never quite left his eyes. "What are you running from, Mr. Garrison?" He set down his coffee cup carefully. "Does it matter?" It might. Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old regrets. "I was a different man once. Had a badge, a purpose, a town that looked to me for protection. Then I made choices, wrong ones. People died who shouldn't have. People lived who should have faced justice. The line between right and wrong got so blurred I couldn't find it anymore. So you left? I was encouraged to leave, forcefully." His hand moved unconsciously to his ribs. Some disagreed with that decision. They've been expressing their disagreement ever since. Sarah absorbed this, understanding more than he'd said. A lawman gone wrong, pursued by those who wanted their own version of justice. She should have been frightened, should have wanted him gone immediately. Instead, she found herself curious about the man beneath the mistakes. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said quietly. "Not everyone." His smile was bitter. "But I appreciate the sentiment." They cleared the dishes together, moving around each other with surprising ease. Sarah found herself aware of small things, the way he dried each plate thoroughly before stacking it, how he knew without asking where things belonged, the careful distance he maintained while still being helpful. "Tell me about your husband," Luke said suddenly. "If you don't mind." Sarah's hand stilled on the wash basin. "Thomas he was a good man, stubborn, maybe too proud for his own good, but honest. He believed in doing things the right way, even when the right way was the hard way. Sounds like he didn't belong in this country. He belonged here more than most. He just believed it could be better than it is." She resumed washing, her voice growing harder. "Harlan Cross disagreed. Cross believes in taking what he wants, and he wanted our water." Luke's expression darkened. "I've known men like that. They think law is just another word for their will. You knew men like that when you wore a badge?" "I was a man like that, Mrs. Whitmore, or close enough to count." The honesty of it stopped her cold. She turned to face him fully. "Yet here you are, splitting my wood and speaking of second chances." "Here I am," he agreed, "though I'm not sure what that proves." The morning stretched on, neither of them acknowledging that Luke had made no move to saddle his horse. Instead, he fixed the loose board on the porch that had been bothering Sarah for months. She found herself starting a pot of stew, too much for one person, and baking bread she didn't need. As the sun climbed higher, they worked in parallel, occasionally intersecting for water or tools or brief exchanges that felt weighted with unspoken possibility. The domestic rhythm of it was both foreign and familiar, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. "You're not what I expected," Sarah said as they took a break on the porch, watching his horse graze in the small paddock. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone harder, maybe more dangerous." Luke's laugh was rueful. "Oh, I'm dangerous enough. Mrs. Whitmore, just tired of it." "Sarah," she said impulsively, "if you're going to stay for stew, you might as well call me Sarah." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or hope. "Luke, then, and I'd be grateful for the stew." The afternoon brought unexpected warmth, the storm's gift of moisture already evaporating under the relentless sun. Luke worked on various repairs around the property. Things Thomas had meant to get to, things Sarah had learned to live without. She tried not to think about how natural it felt, having him there, tried not to compare his quiet competence to Thomas's blustering enthusiasm. As evening approached, they sat down to another shared meal, this time Conversation flowed easier. Luke told her about places he'd seen: California goldfields, Colorado mining towns, the deserts of Arizona. Sarah shared stories of her childhood back east, why she'd come west with Thomas despite her family's objections. They said I was throwing my life away, she remembered, following a dreamer to a land that would kill us both. They were half right. Only half. Sarah met his eyes. I'm still here. Yes, Luke said softly. You are. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and danger. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas, that pull of attraction, the awareness of another person not just as company but as a man. It frightened her. This sudden awakening of feelings she'd buried with her husband. Luke seemed to sense her withdrawal. He stood, moving to the window. I should check the weather. Don't want to get caught by another storm. But the sky was clear. Stars just beginning to show in the deepening blue. They both knew it was an excuse, a retreat from whatever had just passed between them. Where will you go? Sarah asked. When you leave? California, maybe, or Oregon, somewhere the past might not follow. It always follows. Maybe, but sometimes it gets tired along the way. Sarah joined him at the window, careful to maintain distance. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly. A sea of grass turned silver by moonlight. I used to think about leaving, she admitted. After Thomas died, just packing what I could carry and disappearing. What stopped you? This is all I have left of him. This land, this cabin. Even the enemies are his. If I leave, it's like admitting he died for nothing. Luke turned to look at her. Or maybe staying is admitting the same thing. The truth of it hit her like cold water. She'd never thought of it that way. That her stubborn clinging to this place might be its own form of surrender. I'm sorry, Luke said quickly. That was out of line. No. Sarah shook her head. No, you might be right. I've been so focused on holding on. I never asked if what I was holding was worth it. They stood together in the gathering darkness, two damaged souls recognizing something familiar in each other. The night sounds began, coyotes in the distance, the rustle of night birds, the eternal whisper of wind through grass. I should go, Luke said finally, but he didn't move. The stew needs to simmer longer, Sarah replied, though they both knew it was ready. Neither acknowledged the growing tension, the way the air seemed to thicken between them. Sarah remembered her wedding night, the nervous excitement, the discovery of intimacy. This felt different, darker, more complex, weighted with loss and loneliness and the terrible need for human connection. Sarah. Her name on his lips was almost a question. She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. We can't. It wouldn't be right. No, he agreed. It wouldn't. But still, neither moved. The cabin felt too small, too warm, too full of possibilities that morning would make impossible. Sarah thought of the town's whispers, of her reputation already tattered at the edges. She thought of Thomas, of vows made and a life interrupted. She thought of 14 months of empty nights and silent mornings. Tell me about the worst thing you ever did, she said suddenly. When you wore the badge. Luke's jaw tightened. Why? Because if I'm going to ruin what's left of my good name, I should at least know what kind of man I'm ruining it for. The blunt honesty of it seemed to catch him off guard. He moved to the chair by the fire, sinking into it heavily. Sarah took the opposite chair, waiting. There was a family. He began slowly. Mexicans, working a small ranch outside my jurisdiction. The son got crosswise with a big rancher's boy, over a girl, of all things. The rancher wanted them gone, came to me with an offer, looked the other way while his men encouraged them to leave, and he'd make it worth my while. And I needed the money, had debts, gambling mostly, so I looked the other way. His voice was flat, emotionless. They burned the ranch, the family got out, but the old grandmother, she went back for something, didn't make it out the second time. Sarah felt the weight of his confession settle between them. That's why you left? That's why they made me leave, but I should have gone long before. That was just the final straw on a load that was already breaking the horse's back. Yet you're here now, fixing my fence and splitting my wood. Penance, maybe, or just delaying the inevitable. He looked at her directly. I'm not a good man. Sarah, I'm trying to be better, but that doesn't erase what I was. Thomas was a good man, Sarah said quietly. And he's dead. Maybe goodness isn't enough in this world. Don't say that. Why not? It's true, isn't it? The good die young while men like Harlan Cross prosper. Where's the justice in that? Luke leaned forward. The justice is in keeping trying, in not letting them win by becoming like them. Is that what you tell yourself? Every day. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Sarah felt raw, exposed, as if the storm had torn away more than just loose boards. The careful walls she'd built around her heart seemed dangerously unstable. I should tend to my horse, Luke said finally. Make sure he's ready for tomorrow. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. When he stepped outside, she pressed her hands to her face, trying to quiet the tumult of emotions. What was she doing? What was she thinking? This man was a stranger, a self-confessed corrupt lawman with blood on his hands and trouble on his trail. But when he returned, when their eyes met across the small space, none of that seemed to matter. The loneliness was stronger than wisdom, need more powerful than propriety. They moved toward each other like moths to flame, knowing the danger, unable to resist the warmth. Later, much later, as they lay listening to each other breathe in the darkness, Sarah wondered if this was how drowning felt, the moment when fighting ceased and surrender became sweeter than struggle. Luke's hand found hers, calloused fingers intertwining with her work-worn ones. I'll leave before dawn, he whispered. I know. I won't ruin you more than I already have. Sarah turned to face him in the darkness. I'm already ruined. The town made sure of that when they decided I must have driven Thomas to his death somehow. A woman alone is always guilty of something. You're not guilty of anything. I am now. The honesty of it hung between them. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, taken comfort that convention said they shouldn't need. In the morning, he would leave, and she would return to her isolation. But for these few stolen hours, they could pretend that loneliness had a cure, that two broken people might make something briefly whole. Outside, a coyote howled, and its pack answered. The sound was mournful and wild, a reminder that civilization's rules meant nothing to the vast darkness of the prairie. Here, in this small cabin at the edge of nowhere, two souls had found each other in the storm's aftermath. What that meant, what it would cost, tomorrow would tell. But tonight, for just tonight, they weren't alone. Sarah woke alone, as she'd known she would. The space beside her held only the lingering warmth of absence, the pillow still bearing the impression of another head. Through the window, dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed to mock the heaviness in her chest. She rose and dressed mechanically, her fingers fumbling with buttons that had given her no trouble yesterday. In the main room, she found evidence of Luke's quiet departure, the blankets folded again with military precision, the coffee pot still warm on the stove, fresh wood stacked by the fire. On the table, held down by her mother's teacup, was a piece of paper. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. His handwriting was surprisingly elegant, the letters formed with careful deliberation. Sarah, there are no words sufficient for what you've given me. I'll carry the memory of your kindness like a light in dark places, if there's any justice in this world. Someday I'll find a way to deserve the gift of knowing you. I'll ride back, if there's a second chance. L. Sarah read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her Bible. The words were pretty, but words were just marks on paper. Men promised many things in the aftermath of intimacy. Few followed through when distance and time did their work. She moved through her morning chores like a sleepwalker, feeding chickens that seemed to sense her distraction, gathering eggs with hands that shook. Every corner of the property held evidence of Luke's brief presence. The repaired gate, the split wood, the board on the porch that no longer creaked. It was as if a helpful ghost had passed through, leaving improvements in his wake. By noon, when she finally forced herself to ride into town for supplies, Sarah had almost convinced herself it had been a dream, a fever vision brought on by loneliness and storm. But her body knew better, carrying the memory of gentle hands and whispered words, of connection forged in darkness. Cedar Ridge greeted her with its usual suspicious silence. She felt eyes tracking her movement down Main Street, saw curtains twitch in windows as she passed. At Morrison's general store, Ellen Morrison's greeting was cooler than usual, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Heard you weathered the storm all right," Ellen said, weighing out flour with unnecessary precision. "Well enough." Sarah kept her voice neutral. "Jim Hartley said he saw a rider heading out from your direction early this morning. Strange time to be traveling." Sarah's hand stilled on her purse. "Is it? Just unusual, is all." Ellen's eyes glittered with the hunger of a gossip-scenting scandal. "A woman alone needs to be careful about appearances. A woman alone needs flour and salt," Sarah replied evenly. "Are you able to provide those? Or should I take my business elsewhere?" Ellen's face flushed, but she completed the transaction in huffed silence. Sarah gathered her purchases and left, feeling the weight of stares following her to her wagon. As she loaded her supplies, she caught a glimpse of herself in the store window's reflection. Did she look different? Could they see the change in her, the awakening that had replaced resignation? "Mrs. Whitmore." Sarah turned to find Judge Whelan approaching, his lined face bearing its customary expression of paternal concern. He'd been Thomas's friend, one of the few who'd spoken against Harlan Cross after the murder. "Judge," she nodded politely. "I've been meaning to check on you. That was quite a storm." "I managed fine, thank you." He studied her with eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be easily fooled. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind an old man's concern, but you need to be careful. This town has a long memory and a harsh judgment for women who step outside the lines they've drawn." "What lines would those be, Judge?" "The ones that say a widow should grieve forever, should be grateful for scraps of charity, should never remind them that she's still a living, breathing woman with needs and desires of her own." His voice carried bitter understanding. "I've seen what they do to women who refuse to play dead alongside their husbands." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at his unexpected understanding. "And what would you have me do?" "Be smart, be careful, and if you need help." He pressed a card into her hand. "My door is always open." He tipped his hat and moved on, leaving Sarah standing by her wagon, the card clutched in her fist. She climbed onto the seat and headed home, but the judge's words followed her like her own shadow. The next days passed in a blur of routine made strange by memory. Sarah found herself pausing at odd moments, caught by the phantom sensation of a presence that was no longer there. She would start to speak, to share an observation about the weather or the chickens, only to remember she was alone again. But the town wouldn't let her forget her transgression, real or imagined. The whispers grew louder, more pointed. At church on Sunday, the pew around her remained conspicuously empty. Reverend Dawson preached on the wages of sin, his eyes finding her repeatedly throughout the sermon. "The devil comes in pleasing forms," he intoned, "offering comfort to the weak, solace to the grieving. But his gifts are poison, leaving only shame and damnation in their wake." Sarah sat rigid, her chin high, refusing to show how each word landed like a blow. After the service, she was the first to leave, not staying for the social hour where the real judgment would be passed. Walking to her wagon, she found her path blocked by Harlan Cross himself. The man who'd killed her husband stood before her in his Sunday best, silver hair gleaming in the sun, expensive boots polished to a mirror shine. "Mrs. Whitmore." He touched his hat brim with mocking courtesy. "You're looking well, Mr. Cross." She moved a step around him, but he shifted to block her again. "Heard you had a visitor during the storm. Must have been..." Comforting. His smile was cold as a snake's. A woman like you, all alone, needs comfort, doesn't she? What I need is for you to step aside. Now. Now. No need for hostility. In fact, I've been thinking about your situation. A widow, trying to run a place alone, no man's protection. It's not fitting, not safe. Sarah's hands clenched. Is that a threat? It's an observation. This country's getting rougher. Why, just last month, the Hartley place was hit by raiders. Terrible thing. Of course, I was able to help them out. Bought their land at a fair price so they could start fresh somewhere safer. How charitable of you. Cross leaned closer, and she could smell the tobacco on his breath. I could be charitable to you, too. Sarah, may I call you Sarah? That land of yours, with its water rights. I'd give you a good price. Enough to start over somewhere far from here, where nobody knows your name or asks questions about your visitors. My land is not for sale. Everything's for sale, given the right pressure. His eyes hardened. Your husband thought different. Look where it got him. The implied threat hung between them like a loaded gun. Sarah felt rage rise in her throat, hot and choking. This man had killed Thomas, stolen her life, and now stood here threatening to take what little remained. Judge Whelan knows I'm here, she said quietly. Others too. If something happens to me, they'll know where to look. Cross's smile widened. Accidents happen all the time out here. Why, a woman alone, distraught over her, indiscretions, might do any number of desperate things. He tipped his hat again and sauntered away, leaving Sarah shaking with fury and fear. She made it to her wagon, made it home before the tears came. Hot, angry tears for Thomas. For herself, for the trap she'd walked into by simply trying to survive. That night, she barricaded the door and sat up with Thomas's rifle across her lap. Every sound made her jump, the settling of wood, the call of night birds, the whisper of wind. She thought of Luke's words about trouble following, wondered if his past had somehow marked her. Or perhaps she'd been marked already, the moment Thomas died and left her alone in a world that saw widows as either prey or pariahs. Days passed in heightened vigilance. Sarah went to town only when necessary, spoke to no one beyond the required pleasantries of commerce. She felt eyes everywhere, judgment in every glance. At night, she read and reread Luke's note, wondering if his promise was real or just pretty words to ease a guilty conscience. 2 weeks after the storm, she woke to find one of her chickens dead, its neck wrung, body displayed prominently by her door, a warning. The next day, her water barrel was overturned, precious water soaking into the dusty ground, small cruelties designed to wear her down. Sarah reported the incidents to Sheriff Dawes, knowing it was useless. He barely looked up from his desk. Probably coyotes, he said about the chicken. As for the water, well, accidents happen. Maybe you need a man around the place to help with the heavy work. Are you volunteering, Sheriff? His face reddened. Now see here, Mrs. Whitmore, I don't care for your tone. A woman in your position ought to show more respect. A woman in my position ought to be able to expect the law's protection. The law protects decent folk. Start acting decent. Maybe you'll get treated decent. Sarah left the sheriff's office with her head high but her heart sinking. The message was clear. She was on her own, outside the protection of both law and community. That night, she wrote a letter to her sister back east, inquiring about possibilities there. Maybe it was time to admit defeat, to run as Luke had run. But as she sealed the letter, she looked around the cabin Thomas had built, at the land he'd loved enough to die for. The thought of Harlan Cross sitting in this room, drinking from Thomas's cup, profiting from murder, made her sick. She burned the letter and cleaned her rifle instead. The next morning brought a new torment. Someone had poisoned her water supply. She found dead birds around the well. Now she would have to haul water from the stream, a quarter-mile walk each way. As she made the first of many trips, bucket heavy in her hand, Sarah allowed herself to wonder if this was how it would be. A slow grinding down, one cruelty at a time, until she broke or fled or did something desperate enough to justify whatever Cross had planned. Standing by the stream where Thomas had died, Sarah stared at the horizon. Somewhere out there, Luke Garrison was riding toward his own horizon, carrying his past like a weight. He'd promised to come back if there was a second chance, but second chances seemed as rare as rain in drought season, as unlikely as justice in a land where might made right. She filled her bucket and started the long walk back, each step a small act of defiance. They wanted her gone, broken, defeated. But Sarah Whitmore was still here, still standing, still fighting in her quiet way. The question was how long she could hold out alone, and whether help, if it came at all, would arrive in time to matter. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to human struggles, and Sarah carried her water home to a house that echoed with absence. In the distance, storm clouds gathered again, promising more trials to come. She set down her bucket and picked up her rifle, ready for whatever the day might bring. Survival had become her only prayer, endurance her only faith, but in her heart, in the secret place where hope refused to die completely, she whispered the words like a charm against despair. "I'll ride back, if there's a second chance." The prairie wind carried her whisper away, out across the endless grass, toward whatever destiny waited beyond the horizon. Winter arrived like a judgment, harsh and unforgiving. The first snows came early, blanketing the prairie in white silence that muffled sound and made the world seem even more isolated. Sarah watched from her window as the landscape transformed, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. She'd prepared as best she could: wood stacked high, root cellar filled with preserves. Chickens moved to the more sheltered side of the lean-to. But winter in this country was never just about cold and snow. It was about endurance, about lasting one more day when each dawn brought new challenges. The harassment from Cross's men had eased with the weather. Even cruelty had its seasonal limits. But Sarah knew this was merely a respite. Come spring, when the passes cleared and movement became easier, the pressure would resume. For now, though, she had the strange peace of winter's siege. Her daily routine became a careful dance of conservation. Every piece of wood burned was calculated, every meal planned to stretch resources. She melted snow for water now, the well still tainted. The walk to the stream had become impossible with drifts that could swallow a person whole. On a particularly bitter morning, Sarah woke to find her breath freezing in the air inside the cabin. The fire had died in the night, and frost decorated the inside walls like deadly lace. Her fingers were clumsy with cold as she rebuilt the flames, coaxing warmth back into the small space. As she worked, she heard the chickens making a terrible racket. Grabbing Thomas's rifle, she stumbled through the snow to investigate. What she found made her stomach turn: fox tracks circling the coop, and 2 birds dead despite her precautions. But it was the human boot prints mixed with the animal tracks that made her blood run cold. Someone had deliberately damaged the coop's protection, allowing predators access. Sarah repaired what she could with numb fingers, moving the surviving birds into the cabin despite the mess they'd make. She couldn't afford to lose more. The eggs were her only reliable food source besides her dwindling stores. That night, fever took hold. Whether from the cold exposure or the stress finally overwhelming her body's defenses, Sarah found herself burning and shivering by turns. She managed to keep the fire going through sheer will, melting snow for water, rationing her last bit of medicine. In her delirium, she saw Thomas standing by the window, shaking his head sadly. "I told you this land would kill us both," he said, though his voice sounded strange, distant. "I'm not dead yet," she told the apparition. "Neither am I," Luke's voice answered, and for a moment she saw him sitting in the chair by the fire, that crooked smile playing at his lips. "I said I'd come back. Liar," she whispered. Pretty words and broken promises. The fever held her for 3 days. On the 4th, she woke clear-headed but weak as a newborn calf. The chickens had made themselves at home, roosting on her furniture, but they were alive. She was alive. Outside, the blizzard had passed, leaving crystal-clear skies and deadly cold. Sarah forced herself to move, to rebuild routines. She had to believe spring would come, that she could outlast both winter and Harlan Cross. But her body betrayed her new frailty. Simple tasks left her breathless, and the cold seemed to penetrate deeper than before. News filtered through despite the isolation. A traveling preacher, seeking shelter one afternoon, told her of sickness in town, scarlet fever taking the young and old alike. The Morrisons had lost their youngest. The saloon was serving as a makeshift hospital. "It's God's judgment," the preacher declared, warming himself by her fire. "For the wickedness that flourishes here, the drinking, the gambling, the loose morals." His eyes lingered on her meaningfully, and Sarah felt the old anger rise. "And what of murder?" she asked quietly. "What of men who shoot others in the back over water? Does God's judgment reach them?" The preacher's face darkened. "Every soul will face the Almighty's justice in time. Time seems to favor the wicked in these parts." He left soon after, but not before suggesting she might find forgiveness through confession and penitence. Sarah watched him trudge away through the snow, wondering what sins he carried beneath his righteous exterior. The sickness reached even her isolation. Sarah woke one morning to find a bundle on her doorstep, medicine, dried meat, a note in Judge Whelan's shaky hand. "The fever took my Martha. I couldn't save her, but perhaps this will help you. Hold on, child. Spring will come." She wept then for the judge's loss, for her own situation, for the kindness that persisted even in this harsh place. The medicine helped, and the meat stretched her resources. But it was the reminder that she wasn't entirely forgotten that mattered most. February brought a brief thaw, dangerous in its false promise. The snow melted enough to make travel possible, but treacherous. Sarah ventured to check her property lines, finding new horrors. Someone had pulled down sections of her fence, leaving gaps where cattle could stray come spring. More work she'd have to manage alone, more evidence of the slow warfare being waged against her. In town, for essential supplies, she found the place transformed by grief. Black bunting hung from doorways, and the cemetery had expanded with fresh graves. Ellen Morrison looked aged by loss, her previous spite replaced by hollow-eyed indifference. "Heard you've been sick too," Ellen said, mechanically filling Sarah's order. "Surprised you made it, alone out there. I'm stronger than I look, or more stubborn." There was no malice in it now, just weary observation. "My William. He was strong too. Didn't matter in the end." Sarah wanted to offer comfort, but knew it wouldn't be welcomed from her. She paid and left, noting how the town's judgment had shifted in the face of larger tragedy. Her scandals seemed petty now compared to the wholesale loss the fever had brought. At the postal office, she found an unexpected package. No return address, but the postmark showed it had traveled far. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a book, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, and pressed between its pages, a single dried wildflower. No note, but Sarah knew. She held the book against her chest, feeling its solid weight like an anchor. He hadn't forgotten. Somewhere out there, Luke Garrison had thought of her, had sent this token across the miles. It wasn't a rescue, wasn't the promised return, but it was proof that their brief connection had mattered beyond the moment. She read the poetry that night by candlelight, finding comfort in Whitman's celebration of life and nature and human connection. The marked passages told their own story. Loneliness acknowledged, hope stubborn in its persistence. March arrived with violent mood swings, blizzards followed by sudden warmth, ice storms that turned the world to glass. Sarah battled through each challenge, her world shrinking to the basics of survival: wood, water, food, warmth. Everything else was luxury. The cough started innocuously enough, just a tickle in her throat, but it persisted, deepened, began to steal her breath during exertion. Sarah recognized the danger. Pneumonia killed more settlers than Indian raids or gunfights, but recognition and prevention were different things when you lived alone. When every bucket of snow for melting meant exposure to the cold that fed the sickness, she rationed her remaining medicine, tried every folk remedy she knew. Some days were better. allowing hope. Others found her gasping for air, wondering if this was how it would end, not from Cross's bullets or broken heart, but from the quiet killer that stalked the winter week. It was during one of the better days that she noticed the riders. 3 men, watching her place from the ridge. They made no move to approach, just sat their horses like carrion birds waiting. Sarah knew them for Cross's men, knew they were watching for weakness, for the moment when she couldn't defend herself anymore. She made a show of strength, going about her chores with the rifle visible, back straight despite the pain in her chest. Let them think her still formidable. But that night, coughing blood into a handkerchief, she wondered how long the pretense could last. The final storm of winter was the worst, a last violent assertion of the season's power. For 2 days, the world disappeared in white fury. Sarah kept the fire burning through will alone, the woodpile that had seemed so adequate in fall now frighteningly low. The chickens huddled with her in the main room, their soft clucking oddly comforting. When it finally passed, the silence was profound. Sarah pushed open the door to find drifts up to the roof in places, her world transformed into an alien landscape. But on the horizon, she could see something else, the faint green promise of spring beginning its approach. She was still here, battered, sick, nearly broken, but still standing. Cross hadn't driven her off. Winter hadn't killed her. The town's judgment hadn't destroyed her. It was a small victory, perhaps a temporary one, but it was hers, standing in her doorway, looking out at the pristine snow. Sarah allowed herself a moment of pride. She'd survived the worst season of her life alone. Whatever came next, Cross's renewed pressure, her own illness, the uncertain future, she'd face it with the knowledge that she was stronger than she'd imagined. In her pocket, her fingers found the dried flower from Luke's book. Somewhere, spring was already blooming. Somewhere, perhaps, a rider was saddling his horse, remembering a promise made in a storm's aftermath. "I'm still here," she whispered to the empty horizon. "Still waiting for that second chance." The wind carried her words away across the snow, but this time it felt less like loss and more like a message sent forward into possibility. Spring was coming, and with it, perhaps, the redemption they'd both been seeking. Spring came reluctantly to the prairie, fighting winter for every inch of ground. Sarah watched the transformation from her window, patches of brown earth emerging from snow, ice-locked streams beginning their tentative flow, the first brave shoots of grass pushing through frozen soil. Her cough had settled into a constant companion, worse in the mornings, manageable by afternoon. She'd survived winter's siege, but it had extracted its price. The face in her small mirror showed hollowed cheeks and eyes that held too much knowledge of hardship. As soon as the roads became passable, the pressure resumed. Harlan Cross himself rode out with 4 men, stopping just outside her property line. Sarah met them at the door, rifle in hand, trying to hide how the weight of it made her arms tremble. "Mrs. Whitmore," Cross called out, sitting his horse like a king surveying conquered territory. "You're looking poorly. This land is too much for a sick woman alone." "I'm managing fine." "Are you?" He gestured at her broken fences, the obvious signs of winter's damage. "Come spring roundup, cattle are going to wander through those gaps. My cattle, specifically. Would be a shame if they trampled your garden, fouled your water supply." "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Cross." "It sounds like reality, but I'm a reasonable man. My offer stands. Good money for this land. Enough to see you comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere healthier. My husband's blood is in this soil. I won't sell." Cross's expression hardened. "Your husband was a fool who didn't know when to bend. Don't make his mistake." They left, but Sarah knew it was far from over. She spent the next days trying to repair the fence, but her weakness made the work agonizingly slow. Every post driven left her gasping. Every strand of wire stretched cost more energy than she had to spare. It was while struggling with a particularly stubborn section that she heard about the newcomer. Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring ranch stopped by with her monthly charity, eggs and preserves. Sarah's pride wanted to refuse, but her pragmatism couldn't afford to. "There's talk of a man helping folks around the county." "Mrs." Patterson said, settling her bulk into Sarah's only good chair. "Shows up where there's trouble, sets things right, disappears before anyone can properly thank him. They're calling him the Ghost Rider." Sarah's heart stuttered. "What kind of trouble?" "Oh, all sorts. Helped the widow Hensley when rustlers tried to take her horses. Fixed the dam those Crawford boys destroyed at the Mexican settlement. Even heard he faced down 3 of Bart Hutchins' men who were harassing the Chinese laundry folks." "What does he look like? This ghost?" "Mrs." Patterson shrugged. "Stories vary. Tall, they say. Dark hair. Rides a bay horse with a white blaze. Doesn't talk much. Just does what needs doing and moves on." After her visitor left, Sarah stood at her window, scanning the horizon. Could it be? But no, the world was full of tall, dark-haired men with bay horses. And Luke had promised to come back, not to circle around playing guardian angel to strangers. Still, hope was a stubborn weed, growing in the unlikeliest ground. The attack came 3 nights later. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke, saw a flickering orange through her window. The lean-to was ablaze, her horses screaming in terror. She grabbed a bucket, but the well was too far, the fire too fast. By the time she'd freed the horses, driving them out into the night, the structure was beyond saving. She fought the flames to keep them from spreading to the cabin, coughing until she tasted blood, her nightdress singed and blackened. When dawn came, she stood among the ashes of her shelter, knowing this was no accident. The message was clear. Next time, it would be her home. That's when she saw him, a lone rider on the ridge, watching, even at distance, even through smoke-stung eyes. She knew that silhouette. He raised one hand, greeting or farewell. She couldn't tell, then turned and vanished over the hill. "Luke," she whispered, but the wind took his name away. She found supplies on her porch the next morning. Lumber, nails, a new hammer. No note, but the message was clear. Rebuild. Sarah wanted to weep at the gift, at the cruelty of help that came without the helper, at the persistence of a connection that refused to die but wouldn't fully live either. She began rebuilding. Slowly. Painfully. Each day brought small progress and smaller strength. The cough worsened, bringing a fever that came and went like an unwelcome visitor. But the work gave her purpose, kept her moving when lying down would have been so much easier. Word of the Ghost Rider's activities spread. He'd been seen near Cross's ranch, they said. Several of Cross's men had been found tied to trees, bearing signs of rough handling. Water diverted illegally from smaller ranches had mysteriously returned to its proper channels. It was as if someone was waging a careful war against injustice, never killing but making his point with fists and strategy. Sarah knew she should disapprove of vigilante justice. Thomas would have, believing in law and proper channels, but Thomas was dead, and the law had looked the other way. If someone was finally pushing back against the Harlan Crosses of the world, she couldn't find it in her heart to condemn them. The confrontation, when it came, was almost anticlimactic in its swiftness. Sarah had gone to town for supplies, leaving early to avoid the heat that made her cough worse. She was loading her wagon when she sensed the change in atmosphere. Conversation stopping, people stepping back, the quality of silence that preceded violence. 3 of Cross's men surrounded her wagon. She recognized them. Daniels, Morrison, and Cole, hard men who'd ridden with Cross for years, who'd probably been there the night Thomas died. "Mrs. Whitmore," Daniels said, his scarred face split by an ugly grin. "Boss says you need more encouragement to see sense. Step away from my wagon." "Or what? You'll cough us to death?" Morrison laughed. "Heard you been sick. Real shame if you were to take a bad turn. All alone out there." They moved closer, and Sarah reached for her rifle. Cole was faster, grabbing her wrist, twisting until she cried out and dropped the weapon. His breath stank of whiskey and tobacco as he leaned close. "Maybe we should teach you some manners first." The words died as Cole suddenly flew backward, a blur of motion resolving into a man in worn trail clothes. "Luke," He moved like controlled lightning, dropping Morrison with a precise blow to the jaw, spinning to catch Daniel's wild swing and redirect it into the wagon wheel. In seconds, all three were on the ground, groaning. Luke stood over them, barely breathing hard, his hand resting on his gun but not drawing it. "Touch her again," he said quietly, "and I'll kill you. Tell Cross the same. His time's coming." He turned to Sarah then, and she saw the months written on his face. New lines, a fresh scar along his neck, something harder in his storm-gray eyes. But when he looked at her, some of that hardness melted. "Can you drive?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then drive? I'll follow." The ride home passed in a daze. Sarah's hands shook on the reins, reaction and relief and anger all fighting for dominance. He'd come back. He'd saved her. He'd stayed away for months while she nearly died. At her cabin, she rounded on him before he could speak. "A book, that's all I was worth? A book and pressed flour while I fought off Cross alone?" "You were never alone." His voice was steady, but she saw the flinch. "Who do you think kept the wolves from your door in January? Who made sure you found that medicine? Who's been systematically destroying Cross's operation piece by piece? A ghost, a shadow. Not the man who promised to come back. I am back." "Are you?" Sarah felt tears threaten, refused to let them fall. "Or will you disappear again the moment I blink?" Luke dismounted slowly, favoring his ribs in a way that suggested recent damage. "I've been working to make it safe. Cross has connections, influence. I couldn't just ride in and call him out. It had to be done carefully. Proof gathered, allies recruited. I didn't need a hero. I needed—" She stopped, unwilling to voice the depth of her need. "You needed someone who wouldn't get you killed by association." He stepped closer, and she could see the toll his campaign had taken. "Sarah, there's a federal marshal coming. Judge Whelan helped me contact him. Present evidence. Cross is going to face real justice, but it's going to get ugly first. He knows the walls are closing in. So you're here to warn me, to tell me to run?" "I'm here to stand with you, if you'll have me." He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a worn leather folder. "This is a deputy's commission. Turns out the marshal appreciates someone who knows the territory, even someone with my past. It's not much, but it's legal authority." Sarah stared at the badge, at the man holding it. "You're asking me to trust you again." "I'm asking you to let me earn that trust." His eyes met hers. "I told you I'd ride back for a second chance. This is me asking for it." The moment stretched between them, weighted with months of loneliness, fear, and stubborn hope. Sarah thought of winter nights when death seemed close, of spring mornings when life felt possible again, of the book of poetry that had kept her company through the darkest hours. "The lean-to needs rebuilding," she said finally. "And the fence is a disaster. If you're staying, you'll work." A smile, the first real smile she'd seen from him, transformed his face. "Yes, ma'am." "And Luke?" She waited until he met her eyes. "If you disappear again, ghost or no ghost, I'll hunt you down myself." "Understood." They stood there in the spring afternoon, two battered souls considering the possibility of building something new on ground scarred by loss. It wouldn't be easy. Cross would fight back, the town would gossip, and trust once broken was hard to repair. But the prairie grass was turning green, wildflowers were beginning to bloom, and sometimes a second chance was all anyone could ask for. Sarah looked at the man who'd ridden back as promised, who'd fought battles in shadow to keep her safe, who offered now to stand beside her in the light. "There's stew on the stove," she said, "and your horse needs tending." Luke's smile widened, "Just like old times." "No," Sarah corrected, surprising herself with a small smile of her own. "Nothing like old times. We're different people now." "Better or worse?" She considered it, thinking of all the ways hardship had shaped them both. Stronger, maybe, definitely more careful, but still here. She agreed. As Luke led his horse to what remained of the lean-to, Sarah watched him go. The ghost rider was real. Was here, was hers if she had the courage to claim him. Behind them, Storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Cross's retribution. Certainly, and whatever other trials the frontier had in store. But for now, for this moment, she wasn't alone. The man who'd promised to ride back had kept his word, and together they'd face whatever came next. It wasn't the life she'd planned with Thomas. Wasn't the fairy tale rescue of dime novels. It was better. It was real. It was a second chance built on the ashes of the first, and Sarah Whitmore was ready to see where it led. The lamp cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as Sarah set 2 bowls on the table. It felt strange, this echo of their first night together. Yet everything had changed. The woman who'd opened her door to a stranger in a storm was gone, replaced by someone harder, warier, but perhaps more honest about what she wanted. Luke hung his hat by the door, Thomas's old peg. She noticed, and felt no pang of guilt. The dead had no claim on the living's choices. "You look tired," she said, noting the way he held himself, the careful movements that spoke of more than just the recent fight. "Been a long few months." He settled into the chair with obvious relief. "Cross has men everywhere. Had to be careful. Move at night mostly. Your friend Judge Whelan helped, though, good man. He lost his wife to the fever." Sarah served the stew, remembering the judge's kindness, said helping me gave him purpose. They ate quietly at first, the practiced silence of 2 people relearning each other's rhythms. Sarah found herself studying the changes in Luke's face, the deeper lines, the wariness that never quite left his eyes even here, the way he automatically positioned himself to see both door and window. "Tell me," she said finally, "all of it. Why you stayed away. What you've been doing." Luke set down his spoon, gathering his thoughts. "That morning I left. I made it maybe 10 miles before Cross's men found me. 5 of them. They'd been watching your place, saw me leave, made it clear I had 2 choices. Keep riding and never look back, or die right there. So you kept riding. For about another mile." His smile was grim. "Then I circled back, followed them to town, started learning their patterns, their connections. Cross owns half the territory through fear or favor. Sheriff, mayor, most of the town council. Even has a judge or 2 in his pocket. But not Judge Whelan. No, not him. Whelan's been building a case for years, collecting evidence, waiting for someone with the authority to act. When I approached him..." Luke paused, something flickering across his face. He knew who I was, what I'd been. Should have turned me in, but instead he saw an opportunity. Sarah leaned forward. An opportunity for what? To use someone who understood how corruption works from the inside. I spent months gathering proof, documents, testimonies from people too scared to speak publicly, financial records showing Cross's illegal dealings, all while playing ghost, keeping his men off balance, protecting folks like you who stood in his way. The lumber, the medicine, that was all you? Had help. There are more good people around here than you might think. Sarah, they're just scared. But when they saw someone pushing back, he shrugged. Courage can be contagious. Sarah digested this, anger and gratitude warring in her chest. You could have told me, a note, a message, something. Every contact risked exposure. Cross was already suspicious of you. If he'd known for certain we were connected. Luke's jaw tightened. I've seen what he does to people he considers threats. Wasn't going to let that happen to you. That wasn't your choice to make. No, he agreed quietly. It wasn't. I'm sorry. The simple apology, without excuse or elaboration, somehow eased the knot of resentment she'd carried. Sarah rose to clear the dishes, needing movement to process everything. At the wash basin, she felt him come up behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. I dreamed about this, he said softly, on cold nights, sleeping rough, watching Cross's compound. Dreamed about being here again, talking like normal people, sharing a meal without looking over our shoulders. Sarah turned to face him, seeing her own loneliness reflected in his eyes. We're not normal people. Luke, maybe we never were. Maybe that's why this works. The space between them seemed to hum with possibility. Sarah thought of all the reasons to be sensible, to maintain distance, to protect what was left of her reputation. Then she thought of winter nights when death felt close and she'd wished for just one more hour with someone who understood. "The town already thinks the worst of me," she said. "Their loss. I'm sick. The winter. It took something from me. I might not have long." Luke's hand came up to cup her face, gentle as morning light. "Then we'd better not waste what time we have." This time, when they came together, it was with full knowledge of who they were, broken people in a harsh land, carrying scars and secrets, choosing connection despite the cost. The lamp burned low as they rediscovered each other, mapping the changes months had wrought, finding comfort in touch and whispered words. Later, lying in the dark with her head on his chest, Sarah felt a peace she'd thought lost forever. Not the innocent contentment of her marriage to Thomas, but something deeper. Acceptance of life's complexity. Gratitude for unexpected grace. "What happens now?" she asked. "Marshall arrives in 3 days. We present the evidence. Arrest warrants get issued. Cross will fight, but legally he's finished." Luke's arm tightened around her. "It's going to be dangerous. He's got maybe 20 men who'll stand with him. When cornered, he'll lash out." "Will the town support the law?" "Some will. Others will side with Cross out of fear or greed. Still others will just try to stay out of the way." He was quiet for a moment. "You could leave. Stay with Judge Whelan until it's over." Sarah raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "This is my land, my home. I've bled for it, nearly died for it. I'm not running now." "Stubborn woman. You knew that when you rode back." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "That I did." They talked through the night, planning and remembering by turns. Luke told her about the people he'd helped as the Ghost Rider, the families saved from Cross's predation, the small victories that had slowly turned the tide of fear. Sarah shared her own war stories, the winter nights, the slow harassment, the moment she decided to live rather than just survive. "I used to think Thomas was brave for standing up to Cross," she said as dawn approached. "Now I think maybe he was just naive, thought being right was enough." "Being right helps. Being smart about it helps more." Luke traced patterns on her shoulder. "Your husband was a good man." "Sarah, his death wasn't meaningless. It started people thinking, questioning, made them ready for change when the opportunity came." "Would you have liked him?" Luke considered. "I think so. Any man who could inspire this kind of loyalty, who could win your heart. Yeah, I think we'd have gotten along." It was generous, more than she'd expected. Sarah kissed him in gratitude, tasting forgiveness for sins real and imagined. As the sun rose, they dressed and prepared for the day. There was work to do. The lean-to still needed rebuilding. Preparations had to be made for the coming conflict. But first, breakfast together in the morning light. Ordinary and extraordinary at once. "I need to ride to town," Luke said as they finished eating. "Check in with Judge Whelan. Make sure everything's ready for the marshal. Want to come?" Sarah thought about facing the town stairs with Luke beside her, the gossip that would explode. Then she thought about hiding, about letting fear dictate her choices, and her spine straightened. "Yes, I need supplies anyway." They rode in together, Sarah on one of her horses that had survived the fire, Luke on his bay. The morning was fresh with spring promise, wildflowers dotting the prairie in splashes of color. It felt like riding toward a new life, leaving the winter woman behind, in town. Their appearance together caused the stir Sarah had expected. Conversation stopped, heads turned, whispers followed their progress down Main Street. But there were also nods of acknowledgement, tips of hats from people who'd benefited from the Ghost Rider's intervention. At the general store, Ellen Morrison served them with something approaching civility. The fever had humbled her, and perhaps the stories of Luke's activities had earned a grudging respect. Judge Whelan received them in his study, looking frailer than when Sarah had last seen him, but with fire still burning in his eyes. "Marshal Thompson will arrive Friday," he confirmed. "I've arranged for deputies from the surrounding counties to assist. We'll have the numbers to face Cross's men. He won't go quietly, Luke warned. No, I expect not. Whelan's smile was sharp. But then, neither will we. This town has cowered long enough. Time to remember what justice looks like. They spent an hour reviewing plans, contingencies, likely scenarios. Sarah found herself included naturally in the discussion, her knowledge of the land and its people valuable. It felt good to be useful, to be part of something larger than mere survival. Leaving the judge's house, they nearly collided with Reverend Dawson. The preacher's face went through several expressions: surprise, disapproval, calculation, before settling on unctuous concern. Mrs. Whitmore and companion, I heard about the trouble at your place. Such trials you've endured. Perhaps it's a sign that a woman alone— I'm not alone, Sarah interrupted calmly. Haven't been for some time. Actually, the Ghost Rider saw to that. Understanding dawned in the Reverend's eyes, followed quickly by fear. He'd been one of Cross's most vocal supporters, praising the man's charity while ignoring his crimes. Now the ground was shifting, and he was scrambling for stable footing. Of course. Well, may the Lord watch over you both in these troubled times. He scurried away, no doubt to spread this new development through his network. By evening, everyone would know that Sarah Whitmore had taken up with the Ghost Rider, that lines were being drawn for a confrontation. That was probably unwise, Luke said mildly as they mounted their horses. Probably. Sarah couldn't find it in herself to care, but satisfying. They rode home through the warming afternoon, stopping at the stream where Thomas had died. Sarah dismounted, walked to the water's edge. The spring melt had swollen it, washing away any lingering traces of old blood. I used to come here and rage, she said quietly. Scream at God, at Thomas, at the water itself, demanded to know why. Why him? Why this way? Why was I left alone? Luke came to stand beside her. Find any answers? No, just more questions. She picked up a smooth stone, turned it over in her hands. But maybe that's enough. Maybe the point isn't understanding why things happen, but choosing what to do next. And what are you choosing, Sarah? She looked at him, this complicated man with blood on his hands and justice in his heart, who'd ridden back against all odds to offer her a second chance. I'm choosing to live, to fight, to see this through. She threw the stone into the stream, watching ripples spread. To trust you, despite everything, to believe we might build something good on all this wreckage. Luke took her hand, laced their fingers together. That's a lot of choosing. I had a lot of time to think this winter. They stood there a moment longer, hands linked, watching the water that had taken so much flow toward an uncertain future. Then they mounted up and rode home to prepare for war, knowing that in 3 days everything would change. But for now, they had these stolen hours. Tonight there would be dinner and conversation and the comfort of another heartbeat in the darkness. Tomorrow they would work side by side, rebuilding what had been destroyed. And if the worst happened, if Cross's violence claimed one or both of them, at least they'd faced it together. The cabin came into view, small but sturdy, smoke rising from the chimney Luke had cleaned. It wasn't much, but it was theirs to defend. Sarah felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This man, this moment, this choice to stand and fight. Whatever came next, she was ready. The morning of reckoning came with an unseasonable chill, as if nature itself sensed the violence brewing. Sarah woke before dawn, finding Luke already dressed and checking his weapons by lamplight. His movements were methodical, practiced, a man preparing for war. Coffee's ready, he said without looking up. You should eat something. Should you? A wry smile touched his lips. Never could stomach food before a fight. Bad habit from the old days. Sarah dressed carefully, choosing her most practical dress, pinning her hair severely back. If today went wrong, she wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her disheveled. She strapped Thomas's pistol to her hip, the weight both foreign and necessary. You remember what we discussed? Luke asked, watching her preparations. If shooting starts, Stay behind cover. Don't try to be a hero. Get to Judge Whelan's if things go bad. Sarah met his eyes. I remember. Doesn't mean I'll do it. Sarah. This is my fight too. Luke, my land, my life they've been trying to destroy. I won't hide while others bleed for my cause. He crossed to her, framed her face with his hands. I know. Just be careful. I've lost too much already. Can't lose you too. They rode to town as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Other riders converged on the main street. Judge Whelan's recruited deputies, townsmen who'd finally found their courage, ranchers who'd suffered under Cross's rule, maybe 30 men in all, faces grim with determination. Marshal Thompson had arrived the night before, a grizzled veteran with eyes that had seen too much. He gathered the volunteers in front of the courthouse, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Harlan Cross has been served with warrants for murder, extortion, and conspiracy. He's refused to surrender. We're going to his ranch to enforce the law. Any man who doesn't want to be part of this, now's the time to leave. No one moved. All right then. Judge Whelan will swear you in as temporary deputies. After that, you follow my orders. We do this legal and proper, but we do it firm. Questions? What about his men? Someone called out. Any who stand with him against the law become outlaws themselves, but we give them a chance to surrender first. This isn't a massacre. It's justice. The swearing-in was brief, voices mixing as they repeated the oath. Sarah stood between Luke and a young rancher named Peterson, who'd lost his brother to Cross's guns. The badge they pinned on felt heavier than its small size warranted. They rode out in formation, Marshal Thompson leading, Luke and his hand-picked men forming the vanguard. Sarah stayed with the second group, rifle across her saddle. The thunder of so many hooves on hard earth sounded like distant drums, warning of the storm to come. Cross's ranch sprawled across prime bottomland, the main house a monument to ill-gotten gains. As they approached, Sarah could see men taking positions behind water troughs, in the barn loft, along the house's second-story windows. Cross had turned his home into a fortress. The marshal called a halt just outside a rifle range. Harlan Cross. His voice boomed across the distance. I'm Federal Marshal Thompson. You're under arrest for murder and numerous other crimes. Come out with your hands empty. And this ends peaceful. The answer came in the form of a rifle shot that kicked up dust near Thompson's horse. The animal danced sideways, but the marshal held his seat, unflinching. That's your answer, then, he said quietly. Then louder. Any man in there wants to walk away. Now's your chance. After this, you're all equally guilty. A pause. Then 3 men emerged from the bunkhouse, hands raised, walking quickly toward the federal force. Cross's voice roared from the house, cursing them for cowards, but they kept walking. The marshal had them secured, then turned back to the ranch. Last chance. Cross! Another shot, closer this time. Thompson sighed like a teacher disappointed in a stubborn student. All right, boys, by the numbers, like we planned. What followed was neither glorious nor cinematic, just the brutal arithmetic of violence. The federal force spread out, using cover, advancing steadily. Gunfire erupted from both sides, the morning air thick with powder smoke and the crack of rifles. Sarah found herself behind an overturned wagon with 2 other deputies, trading shots with defenders in the barn. Her hands were steady as she worked the rifle's action. Thomas's patient teaching coming back. Aim, breathe, squeeze. Watch for movement. Don't waste ammunition. To her left, Luke led a group attempting to flank the house. She watched him move from cover to cover, directing his men with hand signals. Every inch the lawman he'd once been. A defender popped up in a window, drawing a bead on Luke's position. Sarah's rifle spoke before thought formed, and the man tumbled backward. Good shot, Peterson said beside her, his young face pale but determined. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Gradually, the defensive fire slackened. White flags appeared from the bunkhouse. The barn. Men emerged, hands high, defeat in their shoulders. but the main house remained defiant. "Cross!" Marshal Thompson called again. "Your men have surrendered. It's over. Don't make this worse. Go to hell!" The voice from inside was raw, desperate. "You want me? Come get me!" Luke appeared at Sarah's position, a graze along his cheek, seeping blood. He's holed up in the study with maybe 4 men. Windows are barricaded. It'll be costly to dig them out. Unless... Sarah knew that tone. Unless someone who knows the house shows us another way. His smile was sharp. Turns out one of those men who surrendered used to work construction. Helped build Cross's fortress. Says there's a coal chute around back. Leads right to the basement. The marshal approved the plan. A small group. Luke, Sarah, despite his protests, and 4 picked men, circled to the rear of the house while the main force kept Cross's attention focused forward. The coal chute was hidden behind stacked firewood, its iron door secured with a simple padlock that yielded to a pry bar. The descent into darkness felt like entering a tomb, the air thick with coal dust and damp. They emerged in the basement, Luke leading with gun drawn. The house above erupted with gunfire as the marshal increased pressure, covering the sound of their movement. Up the stairs, through the kitchen where a terrified cook huddled in the pantry, down the hallway toward the study. They could hear Cross ranting inside, his voice high with rage and fear. "Teach them all! This is my land, my town. I made this place." Luke positioned his men, then kicked the door with explosive force. The heavy wood slammed open, revealing chaos inside. Overturned furniture as barricades, windows blocked with tables. Cross and 3 men spinning to face this unexpected threat. "Drop them," Luke commanded. For a heartbeat, the world balanced on a knife's edge. Then Cross's face twisted with recognition and hatred. "You! I should have killed you months ago!" He swung his rifle toward Luke. Sarah didn't remember raising her pistol, didn't remember making the choice. The gun bucked in her hand, once, twice. Cross staggered, looking down at spreading crimson on his white shirt with almost comical surprise. "You..." He focused on Sarah, and something like understanding crossed his face. "Whitmore's woman. Of course." He fell to his knees, then forward. His men threw down their weapons, hands rising in surrender. It was over in seconds. Years of tyranny ended by 2 bullets and the courage to pull a trigger. Sarah stared at Cross's still form, waiting to feel something. Triumph, regret, horror. Instead, there was only emptiness, as if a long fever had finally broken. "Sarah," Luke's voice, gentle. "It's done. He's gone." She looked up at him. This man who'd seen her kill and showed no judgment, only concern. "He killed Thomas. Would have killed me. Killed who knows how many others? I know. You did what needed doing. No shame in that." The aftermath was a blur of activity. Prisoners secured. Wounded tended. The ranch searched for evidence of Cross's crimes. They found plenty. Ledgers detailing extortion. Correspondence showing bribery. Even a journal where Cross had recorded his misdeeds with the pride of a man who thought himself untouchable. By afternoon, they were back in town. The news had spread, bringing people into the streets. Some looked shocked, others relieved. Still others calculating what this change meant for their own fortunes. At the courthouse, Marshal Thompson shook Luke's hand, then Sarah's. "Fine work, both of you. Couldn't have done it without local knowledge." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Trials for those who survived, federal oversight to clean up the corruption. This town gets a chance to start fresh, if folks have the stomach for it." He studied them. "Might need a new sheriff. Garrison. Interested?" Luke glanced at Sarah. "Maybe. Need to think on it." They left the courthouse to find Judge Whelan waiting, tears streaming down his weathered face. "It's done," he said wonderingly. Martha would have been so pleased. Justice at last. The celebration that night was subdued. Too many knew the cost of the day's victory. At the saloon, Luke and Sarah sat apart from the main crowd, sharing a bottle and the quiet understanding of those who'd faced death together. "You all right?" Luke asked, studying her face. "I killed a man today." Sarah sipped her whiskey, felt it burn. Thought it would feel different. Worse, maybe, or better. Instead, it just feels necessary. That's the best way to feel about it. Means you're still human. She looked at him, this complex man who'd been both sinner and saint, who'd ridden back to keep a promise, who'd stood with her against the darkness. What Whelan said about starting fresh, is that possible? Can a place built on blood and greed really change? Places are just dirt and wood. It's people who change. Or don't. Luke took her hand. Question is, what do we want to build here? Sarah thought about that as the saloon noise washed over them. Thought about Thomas's dream of a fair, lawful community. About her own months of isolation and survival. About second chances and the courage to take them. Something better, she said finally. Something worth the price we paid. Luke squeezed her hand. Then we'd better get started. Going to take work. I'm not afraid of work. No, he agreed with a smile. You're not afraid of much. Sarah Whitmore. Outside, the town went about the business of reinventing itself. Tomorrow would bring challenges, trials, rebuilding, the messy work of democracy. There would be those who resented the change, who'd preferred Cross's brutal certainty to freedom's complications. But tonight, Sarah sat with the man who'd kept his promise, feeling the shift in the world's foundations. She'd entered this saloon as a pariah, a widow marked by scandal and suspicion. She'd leave it as something else, a woman who'd fought for her land and won, who'd chosen her own path despite the cost. The star on her chest caught the lamplight. Temporary, but earned. Tomorrow she'd return it, go back to being a rancher, a survivor, maybe eventually a wife again if Luke's eyes meant what she thought they did. But she'd always be the woman who'd stood up when it counted, who'd pulled the trigger when justice demanded it, in a land that respected strength above all else. That meant something. It meant everything. Ready to go home? Luke asked. Home, her cabin, their shared space, the life they were carefully building on the ashes of the old. Sarah nodded, standing, feeling the weight of the day but also its liberation. They walked out together into the night, leaving the past behind like smoke on the wind. Ahead lay all the uncertain promise of tomorrow, but for the first time in longer than she could remember. Sarah faced it without fear. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, as two souls who'd found each other in storm and struggle headed home to whatever peace this hard land would allow them. It was enough. It was everything. It was a second chance, earned in blood and keeping. The weeks following Cross's fall passed in a blur of change. Sarah's cough gradually faded with the coming warmth, as if the poison of that long winter had finally released its hold. She stood now at her kitchen window, watching Luke work on the new barn they were raising where the burned lean-to had stood. Other men from town had come to help, a reversal of fortune that still surprised her. Never thought I'd see Jim Peterson taking orders from the Ghost Rider, she murmured to herself, smiling at the sight of Luke directing the barn raising with quiet authority. The door opened behind her, and Judge Whelan entered, removing his hat. He'd taken to visiting regularly, finding solace in their company as he adjusted to widowhood. Sarah, you're looking well, he said, accepting the coffee she offered. This place is transforming. Luke's doing... She glanced out again to where he was hefting a beam into place. He's got a vision for it. And you? What's your vision? Sarah considered the question. For so long, she'd focused on mere survival, on holding on to what Thomas had left. Now, with the future suddenly open before her, she found herself uncertain. I used to think keeping Thomas's dream alive was enough, she said slowly. But that was his dream. Maybe it's time I found my own. Whelan nodded sagely. The dead can inspire us, but they shouldn't chain us. Your Thomas would want you happy. I think he would. Sarah's fingers found the wedding ring she still wore, turned it thoughtfully. We're having a ceremony next month. Nothing fancy, just making things official. About time. The judge's eyes twinkled. Scandal of you two living in sin has been the talk of the town. Poor Reverend Dawson nearly chokes on his sermons every Sunday. They shared a laugh. The Reverend had undergone his own transformation, suddenly discovering charitable interpretations of Scripture once Cross's money stopped flowing to the church coffers. Luke appeared in the doorway, sawdust in his hair, shirt damp with honest sweat. "Judge, didn't hear you ride up. Just stopped by with news. The last of Cross's men were sentenced yesterday. Federal government's sending a new territorial administrator next month. Real laws coming to Cedar Ridge. And they want you to stay on as sheriff," Sarah said to Luke, not quite making it a question. He crossed to the wash basin, cleaning his hands carefully before answering. "They do. Offered a decent salary. House in town. Proper legitimacy after all these years in the shadows. But," Luke dried his hands, turned to face them both. "But I've been a lawman before. Know where that road leads? The politics, the compromises, the gradual wearing away of ideals." He moved to stand beside Sarah, his hand finding hers naturally. "Think maybe I'd rather try something different this time." "Such as?" Whelan asked. "Ranching. Building something instead of just keeping order. Raising horses, maybe some cattle. Making this place what Thomas dreamed it could be." He squeezed Sarah's hand. "If that suits my partner." Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Might suit, though you'll have to learn the difference between a bull and a steer." "I'm educable." Judge Whelan rose, smiling at them both. "Well then, I'll leave you to your planning. Sarah." "Luke." He paused at the door. Martha would have loved to see this. Two people finding happiness after such trials. Gives an old man hope. After he left, Sarah and Luke stood together in comfortable silence. Through the window, they could see the barn taking shape, men working together who'd once viewed each other with suspicion. The transformation of the town continued daily, new businesses opening, families arriving, the slow work of civilization taking root. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked. "About not taking the sheriff position?" "None. Had my fill of wearing a badge, even a righteous one." Luke turned her to face him. "What about you? This isn't the life you planned with Thomas, ranching with a former corrupt lawman who brings nothing but a horse and a questionable past. You bring more than that." Sarah reached up to touch the scar on his cheek, faded now but still visible. "You bring the courage to change, the strength to do what's right even when it's hard, the faithfulness to keep promises." Sweet words. True ones. She rose on her toes to kiss him, tasting sawdust and possibility. "Though you could bathe more often." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "Yes, ma'am." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A small wagon pulled up, carrying a Mexican family, man, woman, and 3 children. Sarah recognized them as the Hernandezes, who'd been driven off their land by Cross 2 years prior. "Senora Whitmore," the man said, hat in hand. "We heard what happened. Heard the one who killed Cross was just... We wondered. Our old land. Is it possible?" "Your land was stolen," Luke said firmly. "Federal court ruled all of Cross's illegal acquisitions void. You want to file a claim? I'll stand witness to your prior ownership." The woman burst into tears, clutching her youngest child. "Gracias, senor. We thought never to see home again," as they helped the family with directions to the land office. Sarah felt another piece of the past settling into place. Justice came in many forms, not just dramatic shootouts, but quiet restorations, the patient work of making things right. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson, Luke pulled out a folded paper. "What's that?" Sarah asked. "Letter from California. My sister—" He unfolded it carefully. "Haven't heard from her in 5 years. Thought she'd written me off for good." Sarah read over his shoulder, seeing formal phrases gradually warm into genuine concern. The sister had heard of Luke's activities as the ghostwriter, his stand against Cross, his newfound legitimacy. She wanted to reconnect, to know her brother again. "Will you write back?" "Already did. Told her about you, about the life we're building." He refolded the letter carefully. "Might even visit someday, when the ranch is established." "Family," Sarah mused. Haven't thought about that in a while. Could think about it now, if you wanted. The suggestion hung between them, delicate as spring frost. Sarah had assumed the winter illness had taken that possibility. But perhaps, maybe, she said softly. Would you want that? Children with my stubbornness and your complicated past? Can't think of better qualities for surviving this country. They sat quietly as darkness gathered, each lost in thoughts of possibility. The night sounds began, coyotes calling, owls hunting, the eternal whisper of prairie wind. But tonight, it didn't sound lonely. Tonight it sounded like home. 2 mornings later, Sarah woke to find Luke already up, standing at the window with an odd expression. What is it? She asked. Joining him? Riders coming. Lot of them. Sarah felt the old fear spike, reached for the rifle, but Luke stayed her hand. Wait, look at how they're riding. That's not a war party. As the group drew closer, Sarah could see he was right. Men, women, even some children, all heading for their property. She recognized faces from town, from neighboring ranches, people who'd kept their distance during her months of isolation. What on earth? The answer came as the first wagons pulled up. Tools, lumber, supplies, the makings of a proper barn raising. But more than that, a community stating its intentions. Heard you were building, Jim Peterson called out, grinning. Figured you could use some help? Lord knows you helped us when it counted. They came all day, bringing food and muscle and goodwill. The barn rose like something conjured, walls straight and true. Women set up outdoor kitchens, children ran between the workers' legs, and laughter replaced the sound of hammers periodically. Sarah found herself overwhelmed, stepping away from the cheerful chaos to catch her breath. Luke found her by the stream, tears on her cheeks. Too much? He asked gently. No, yes, I don't know. She wiped her face, laughing at herself. For so long it was just me against the world. Then you, now, this. Community, Luke said. Takes some getting used to. Thomas would have loved this. It's what he always believed was possible. People choosing to be better, to support each other. He was right. Just took a while for folks to see it. As the sun set on the completed barn, the helpers gradually departed, leaving behind more than just a building. They'd left acceptance, belonging, the promise of a future not faced alone. That night, Sarah removed her wedding ring for the first time since Thomas's death. She held it up to the lamplight, seeing not betrayal, but completion. One chapter ending so another could begin. I'll always love him, she told Luke, who watched from the bed. Part of me will always be the woman who loved Thomas Whitmore. I know, wouldn't want you to be otherwise. She placed the ring in her jewelry box, next to the dried flower from Luke's book, tokens of journeys completed, not shrines to worship. When she joined Luke, she felt lighter somehow, not free of the past but no longer chained to it. They came together with the ease of lovers who'd moved beyond passion into something deeper, partnership, understanding, the quiet joy of shared purpose. Later, as they lay listening to night sounds through the new barn's walls, Sarah voiced the thought that had been growing all day. I want to try, for children, if we can. Luke's arm tightened around her. You sure? This land needs more than our dreams, needs voices to carry them forward. Besides, she added with a smile he could hear, someone needs to inherit all this work we're doing. Practical woman. You knew that when you rode back. That I did. He pressed a kiss to her temple. That I did. The next morning brought the ordinary miracles of a life being built, eggs to gather, horses to tend, the endless work of the frontier. But now it felt different. Not a burden to be endured, but a foundation being laid. Sarah stood in the doorway of the new barn, watching Luke work with a young horse, patient and gentle. In town, she knew, people were telling their story already. The widow and the gunslinger, the storm that brought them together, the violence that forged their bond. It would grow in the telling, become legend. But the truth was both simpler and more complex. Two broken people choosing to heal together. A promise kept against all odds. The courage to fight for justice and the wisdom to know when to holster the gun and pick up the plow. "Sarah," Luke called. "Come see this." She walked into the morning light, into her life, leaving shadows behind. Somewhere out there, other storms were brewing, other fights for justice waiting. But here, now, there was work to do, and love to nurture, and a future to build. The ghost rider was gone. The grieving widow, too. In their place stood Luke and Sarah Garrison, ranchers, partners, survivors who'd found their second chance and made it count. As Sarah took the horse's lead rope from Luke, their hands touching briefly, she whispered the words that had become their private benediction. "I rode back for a second chance. And I was here waiting," she completed, smiling at the man who'd kept his promise. The sun climbed higher, blessing their work, and life continued its patient, precious way. In the distance, mountains stood eternal guard while prairie grass whispered stories of all who'd passed this way. The lost, the found, and those lucky few who discovered that sometimes, against all odds, love rides back. They'd found their second chance. Now all that remained was living it, one day at a time, together. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. If you're enjoying tales of romance and redemption from the American frontier, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories of courage, love, and second chances in the untamed territories. Share your thoughts about Sarah and Luke's journey in the comments. Until next time, partners.